The moment Susan Whitmore knocked on my door at 6 in the morning during the worst cold snap Illinois had seen in 20 years, I knew my weekend was about to get complicated. I had just gotten home from a 72-hour shift at the fire station, and every muscle in my body ached from pulling people out of stranded cars and responding to carbon monoxide calls. The temperature outside had dropped to negative 18 degrees, with wind chills making it feel like negative 40. Half of Springfield was dealing with frozen pipes, and the other half was praying their furnaces would keep running. Brennan, I know you're in there." Susan's shrill voice cut through the howling wind outside. "Open this door immediately." I dragged myself off the couch where I had collapsed, still wearing my department sweatshirt, and opened the door. Susan stood there in a ridiculous pink puffer coat that looked 3 sizes too large. Her highlighted blonde hair sprayed into submission despite the Arctic wind, and her face pinched into the expression she reserved for what she called serious HOA business. "Susan, it's 6 in the morning on a Saturday. This is an emergency, Ryan. My furnace stopped working last night and I have been freezing in my own home for 8 hours. 8 hours. Do you know what the temperature is in my house right now? 53 degrees. 53, I rubbed my eyes. "Did you call a repair company?" "Of course I did. They said they can't get to me until Monday because they have over 300 emergency calls ahead of me. Monday? I could die of hypothermia by then." "Susan, 53 degrees isn't going to give you hypothermia. Bundle up. Use space heaters if you have them, and they'll get to you as soon as they can." Her eyes narrowed. "I heard from Patricia down the street that you have a backup furnace system, some fancy professional setup because of your job. As the HOA president, I am formally requesting that you allow me to stay in your home until my furnace is repaired." I blinked at her, not quite believing what I was hearing. "You want to move into my house, not move in. Just stay temporarily." It's a reasonable request given the extreme circumstances. Actually, now that I think about it, it's more than a request. According to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our HOA bylaws, residents are required to assist neighbors in emergency situations. This qualifies. That section is about things like helping someone who's injured or calling 911. It doesn't mean I have to let you move in with me. Susan's face went red. "Are you refusing to help a neighbor in need, a woman who could freeze to death?" "You're not going to freeze to death at 53 degrees. Go to a hotel." All the hotels within 30 miles are completely booked. Everyone whose heat went out had the same idea. I called 17 places. She crossed her arms. "I'm coming in, Ryan. This is an emergency, and as HOA president, I have the authority to make executive decisions for the safety of residents." "No, you don't. And I'm not letting you in. I just worked 3 days straight without sleep and I'm going to bed." "Fine." She pulled out her phone. "Then I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting. We'll see what the other board members think about your refusal to help during a crisis, and I'll be documenting the temperature in my house every hour for my lawsuit. If I get sick or injured because you refuse to help me, you'll be hearing from my lawyer. Good day, Ryan." She stormed off my porch, nearly slipping on the ice in her impractical boots. I closed the door and wondered how someone could be so dramatic about a temporary inconvenience. My phone buzzed before I even made it back to the couch. It was a text in the HOA board group chat. "Emergency meeting today at noon. Brennan's house. Mandatory attendance." I typed back, "You can't hold a meeting at my house without my permission." Susan replied immediately. Section 9, Paragraph 2. Emergency meetings can be held at any board member's residence if the circumstances warrant immediate action. See you at noon. I wasn't even on the HOA board. I had specifically avoided getting involved in HOA politics because I'd seen what happened to people who did. They spent all their time arguing about mailbox colors and fence heights instead of living their lives. But somehow, Susan had twisted some obscure bylaw to justify invading my home. My phone rang. It was Tom Chen, my next-door neighbor and one of the more reasonable people in the neighborhood. "Ryan, I just saw Susan leaving your place looking angry. What happened?" I explained the situation while making coffee. Tom sighed. "She texted me too about the meeting. Look, I'm not on the board either, but she's claiming this is a neighborhood-wide emergency. She's been texting everyone saying you're refusing to help during a crisis and that we need to take action to ensure community safety. She wants to move into my house, Tom. That's insane." "I know it is, but you know how Susan gets. She'll make everyone's life miserable until she gets her way. Remember when the Martinez family painted their front door navy blue instead of the approved midnight blue? She had them cited 3 times and threatened to put a lien on their house. That was ridiculous too. I'm just saying, she doesn't let things go. Anyway, I'll try to stop by around noon to be a voice of reason. Maybe if enough people tell her she's overreacting, she'll back down." After Tom hung up, I managed to get about 4 hours of sleep before my alarm went off at 11:30. I took a hot shower, which reminded me how lucky I was to have a functioning furnace, and made myself presentable. By noon, my driveway was full of cars. I opened the door to find Susan standing there with 8 other people from the neighborhood. Most of them looked embarrassed to be there. "This is private property," I said. "You can't just show up with a crowd." "We're here for an official HOA meeting," Susan said, pushing past me. The others followed reluctantly, apologizing with their eyes as they filed into my living room. I recognized most of them. Tom and his wife Linda. Patricia Hughes, who was Susan's closest ally on most issues. Marcus and Jennifer Williams from 3 houses down. David Porter, who always looked confused at these things. And 3 others whose names I couldn't quite remember. Susan positioned herself in the center of my living room like she owned the place. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you know, we're experiencing unprecedented cold weather, and it has brought to light some serious concerns about community preparedness and neighbor cooperation." "Susan, can we skip the speech?" Tom said. "Just tell everyone what this is actually about." Susan's jaw tightened. "Fine." Ryan has a backup heating system in his home, clearly visible from the external unit in his backyard. Meanwhile, my furnace has failed, and I'm being forced to live in Arctic conditions. When I asked Ryan for reasonable accommodation during this emergency, he refused. Flat out refused. Patricia gasped on cue, as she always did when Susan needed dramatic support. "That's not what happened," I said. "Susan demanded to move into my house. That's not a reasonable request." "So you admit you refused to help her," Patricia said. "I suggested she go to a hotel, use space heaters, or wait for the repair company like everyone else whose furnace broke down." "All the hotels are booked," Susan said, "and space heaters are dangerous. There have been dozens of house fires this week from space heaters." That last part was actually true. We'd responded to 4 space heater fires in the past 2 days alone, but I wasn't about to let Susan use that as ammunition. "Space heaters are safe if used properly," I said. "Keep them away from flammable materials, don't overload circuits, and never leave them unattended." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one freezing." Susan turned to address the group. "I propose we implement a new emergency protocol. Any resident with backup heating systems must make them available to neighbors whose primary systems have failed. It's only fair." That's completely unreasonable, Tom said. You can't force people to let others into their homes. We're a community, Susan said. We're supposed to help each other. That's the whole point of an HOA. Ryan has more heat than he needs while I'm suffering. How is that fair? Marcus Williams cleared his throat. He was a lawyer who usually stayed out of HOA drama. Susan, there's no legal basis for what you're proposing. You can't compel someone to surrender use of their private property, especially not their primary residence. What about the emergency assistance clause? Susan pulled out a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. That clause requires reasonable assistance in emergencies, like calling 911 or helping someone who's injured. It doesn't mean Ryan has to house you. But he has the means to help, and he's choosing not to. That's a violation of the community spirit. Spirit isn't law, Marcus said flatly. Susan's face was getting redder by the second. Fine. Then I'm proposing a new rule for the next HOA meeting. Any resident with backup systems must register them with the HOA and make them available during emergencies. You can't retroactively apply a rule that doesn't exist yet, Marcus said. And even if you passed such a rule, it would likely be unenforceable. I decided it was time to end this circus. Everyone, I appreciate you coming, but this meeting is over. Susan, you need to leave my property. All of you need to leave. We haven't finished discussing this, Susan said. Yes, we have. There's nothing to discuss. My home is my private property, and I'm not opening it to anyone just because you're experiencing a temporary inconvenience. Temporary? My furnace could be broken for days. Then go stay with family or friends, but you're not staying here. Patricia stood up, gathering her coat. This is outrageous, Ryan. When you need help someday, don't come crying to the community. I won't, I said, because I understand boundaries and reasonable expectations. Tom and Linda were the last to leave after everyone else had filed out. Tom pulled me aside at the door. She's not going to let this go, he said quietly. Susan has been looking for a reason to go after you ever since you refused to join the board last year. I know. But what am I supposed to do? Let her move in? Of course not. Just watch your back. She's already talking about fines and violations. She'll find something to cite you for. After they left, I locked my door and tried to relax. My phone had been buzzing constantly during the meeting. Apparently, Susan had been texting other neighbors about the situation, painting me as some kind of villain who was hoarding heat while she froze. The texts ranged from supportive to confused to outright hostile. One person I'd never even met sent me a message saying I should be ashamed of myself for not helping an elderly woman in need. Susan was 52, hardly elderly, but facts didn't seem to matter much in her narrative. I was scheduled to go back to work on Monday, which meant I had one more day to myself. I spent Sunday trying to catch up on sleep and ignoring the increasingly unhinged texts from Susan about how cold her house was and how this was all my fault. Monday morning arrived with the temperature finally climbing up to a balmy -5 degrees. I headed to the fire station at 6, ready for another potentially crazy shift. Chief Morrison was already there when I arrived, looking at a stack of reports. Brennan, good, you're here. We need to talk about something. What's up, Chief? I got a complaint filed against you. Personal complaint, not work-related, but the person who filed it made sure to mention you're one of my firefighters. My stomach sank. Let me guess, Susan Whitmore. You know her. She's my HOA president. Long story. Chief Morrison handed me a printed email. It was from Susan, addressed to both the fire department and the city council, claiming that I had expertise in heating systems due to my professional role, and was refusing to assist a vulnerable resident during a life-threatening cold emergency. and that my behavior reflects poorly on the fire department's commitment to public safety. She's trying to get me in trouble at work because I wouldn't let her move into my house, I said, explaining the whole situation. Chief Morrison listened, his expression neutral, then started laughing. She actually tried to move in with you. She claims she has some HOA right to access my backup furnace. That's the most ridiculous thing I've heard all week, and someone called 911 yesterday because their neighbor's Christmas lights were still up. Look, obviously you're not in any trouble here. You're not obligated to house anyone on your personal time, but this woman sounds like a piece of work. She is. Just document everything if she keeps pushing, and if she files any more complaints about you, I'll handle it. The shift was relatively quiet for a change. Only 2 medical calls and 1 false alarm. I got home Tuesday morning feeling almost rested for the first time in a week. The temperature had risen to a shocking 15 degrees, and the forecast predicted it would hit the 20s by the weekend. I pulled into my driveway and immediately noticed something wrong. There was an orange citation sticker on my front door. I parked and walked up to read it. Notice of violation. The following violations have been observed at this property. 1. Unauthorized exterior mechanical unit visible from street, backup heating system. 2. Excessive noise from mechanical equipment. 3. Failure to maintain approved exterior aesthetic standards. Fine, $500 per violation. Total, $1,500. You have 10 days to remedy these violations or face additional fines and potential legal action. It was signed by Susan Whitmore, HOA president. I stared at the notice in disbelief. The backup furnace unit had been visible from the street for 3 years. Nobody had ever said anything about it before, and it certainly wasn't noisy. As for aesthetic standards, it was a standard HVAC unit that looked identical to everyone else's furnace units. I called Marcus Williams, the lawyer from the neighborhood. Marcus, it's Ryan Brennan. Susan just hit me with $1,500 in fines that are completely bogus. Can she do that? Slow down. What are the violations? I read him the notice. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Okay, first, take pictures of your equipment and date them. Show that it's been there for years. Second, check your HOA's records to see if there are any actual rules about external HVAC equipment. Third, don't pay the fine. You have the right to contest it at the next HOA meeting. When's the next meeting? Should be in 2 weeks. But Ryan, I have to tell you, Susan has been on a warpath about this. She's been calling board members trying to drum up support for sanctions against you. Sanctions. She wants to hit you with escalating fines until you either let her use your backup furnace or remove it entirely. She can't make me remove my furnace. Probably not, but she can make your life difficult. HOA presidents have a lot of discretionary power when it comes to violations. The good news is that the board has to approve major fines and actions. The bad news is that Susan is very persuasive, and a lot of people don't want to cross her. After hanging up with Marcus, I spent the next hour going through my files to find the original permits and approvals for my backup furnace installation. I'd had it installed 3 years ago after a bad winter where my primary furnace had died and left me without heat for 4 days. As a firefighter, I'd responded to too many calls where people had died from carbon monoxide poisoning or hypothermia because their heating failed. I wasn't going to let that happen to me. The installation had been fully permitted through the city, and I'd even gotten written approval from the HOA board at the time. Susan hadn't been president then. That position had been held by a reasonable guy named Frank something who'd moved away 2 years ago. I scanned all my documents and sent them to Marcus. along with photos showing that my unit looked identical to standard furnace installations throughout the neighborhood. Wednesday brought a new wave of harassment. Susan had apparently decided that if she couldn't force me to help her, she'd make sure everyone in the neighborhood knew what kind of person I was. She'd posted in the neighborhood Facebook group about residents who refused to help their neighbors and the importance of community solidarity during emergencies. She didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who she was talking about. The comments were split between people defending me and people agreeing with Susan that I should have done more to help. One comment from Patricia Hughes particularly annoyed me. Some people think that having an important job makes them better than everyone else. But we're all equal members of this community, and nobody should get special privileges. I typed out 3 different responses before deleting all of them. Engaging with Susan's campaign would only make things worse. Thursday, I got a certified letter in the mail. It was from the HOA's attorney, a stern legal notice stating that I was in violation of multiple covenants and that failure to remedy the violations within 30 days would result in a lien being placed on my property. That crossed a line. I called Marcus again. They're threatening a lien already. That's incredibly aggressive. Usually there's a whole process before it gets to that point. Let me make some calls. An hour later, Marcus called back. Okay, so here's what I found out. Susan hired a new attorney for the HOA last month, guy named Richard Polk. He's known for being very aggressive with enforcement. He used to work for one of the big HOA management companies that got sued for predatory practices. Great. The good news is that Susan overplayed her hand. She can't just slap a lien on your property without going through the proper channels. The board has to vote on it, and there has to be a legitimate violation. Based on the documents you sent me, you didn't violate anything. So what do I do? Show up to the HOA meeting in 2 weeks with all your documentation. I'll be there too. We'll shut this down. Friday afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Ryan Brennan? A professional female voice. Yes. This is Teresa Jenkins from Channel 7 News. We received a tip about a dispute in your neighborhood involving an HOA and heating systems during the cold snap. Would you be willing to comment? Susan called the news. I can't reveal my sources, but we're interested in doing a story about HOA overreach during emergencies. Would you be willing to tell your side? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to expose Susan's ridiculous behavior to the world. But another part knew that going public would only escalate things further. I appreciate the call, but I'm going to handle this privately through the proper channels. Are you sure? We've been getting a lot of tips about HOA problems lately. This could be part of a larger story about how HOAs handle emergencies. I'm sure. Thank you, though. After I hung up, I wondered who had tipped off the news. It could have been Susan trying to apply public pressure. Or it could have been someone else in the neighborhood who was tired of her antics. Either way, I'd made the right call staying out of it. The weekend passed quietly. The temperature continued to rise, hitting the high 20s by Sunday. Susan's furnace was finally repaired on Saturday, according to the neighborhood gossip chain. I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Monday morning, I woke up to find my trash cans had been knocked over and garbage strewn across my yard. It could have been animals, but the timing felt suspicious. I cleaned it up and didn't think much of it until Tuesday, when the same thing happened. Wednesday, someone let the air out of my tires while my truck was parked in my driveway overnight. Thursday, I found dog feces smeared on my mailbox. I installed security cameras on Friday. Saturday night, the cameras caught Patricia Hughes, Susan's right-hand woman, approaching my house at 2 in the morning. She was carrying something, but the image wasn't clear enough to see what. She got close to my front door, then apparently noticed the camera and hurried away. Sunday morning, I found that someone had tried to spray paint something on my garage door but had apparently been scared off before finishing. All that was visible was a partial S in orange paint. I downloaded all the security footage and called the police. Officer Janet Reeves came out to take my report. "This is clearly harassment," she said after reviewing the footage. "Do you know this woman? She's part of my HOA board. She and the HOA president have been targeting me over a dispute about letting the president stay at my house during the cold snap." Officer Reeves raised her eyebrows. "Someone wanted to stay at your house." I explained the whole situation. She took notes and shook her head. "I've dealt with HOA disputes before, but this is extreme. The vandalism and harassment are criminal offenses. Do you want to press charges? I want this to stop. If pressing charges is what it takes, then yes." "Okay, I'll file the report and follow up with this Patricia Hughes. The footage is clear enough for identification. She'll probably get a citation at minimum, possibly criminal charges depending on what the DA wants to do." The HOA meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening. I showed up 15 minutes early with Marcus and found the community center already packed. Word had apparently spread that there was going to be drama, and people loved drama. Susan sat at the front table with Patricia, who looked nervous and kept glancing at me. The other board members, David Porter and Margaret Chen, looked uncomfortable. At exactly 7 o'clock, Susan called the meeting to order. "We have a full agenda tonight, but first, we need to address the ongoing situation with Ryan Brennan and his refusal to comply with community standards." "Point of order," Marcus said, standing up. "The alleged violations against my client are based on misrepresentations and selective enforcement. I have documentation proving that Mr. Brennan's heating equipment was properly permitted and approved by this HOA 3 years ago." Susan's face tightened. "That approval was granted under different circumstances and different leadership. The current board has the right to reassess previous decisions." "Actually, you don't," Marcus said. "Once equipment is approved and installed, you can't retroactively declare it a violation without proving it violates a specific, existing rule. Which specific rule does his equipment violate?" Susan flipped through her papers. "Section 15, paragraph 8. No external mechanical equipment may be visible from the street unless it is standard and necessary for property function. Mr. Brennan's backup heating system is both standard and necessary. It's a safety feature given his professional obligations and irregular schedule. Furthermore, identical equipment is visible on at least 12 other properties in this neighborhood. Are you planning to fine all of them as well? This isn't about other properties. But it should be, if you're enforcing rules fairly and consistently. Selective enforcement is discriminatory and actionable." Susan stood up, her voice rising. "This is about someone who thinks he's above community rules because he has a backup furnace and won't share it with neighbors who are suffering." The room went quiet. Susan had finally said the quiet part out loud. Marcus smiled. "So this isn't actually about violations at all. This is retaliation because Mr. Brennan declined to allow you to stay in his home during the cold snap." "I didn't say that. You just did. Everyone here heard you." Marcus turned to address the room. "Susan Whitmore attempted to force my client to house her during an emergency. When he reasonably declined, she began a campaign of harassment including false violations, threats of liens, and coordination with another board member to vandalize his property." Patricia stood up suddenly. "I didn't vandalize anything. Then why were you at Mr. Brennan's house at 2 in the morning last Saturday? We have you on camera." The room erupted in whispers. Patricia's face went white. "I was just checking to see if he was okay. I was concerned about community safety." At 2 in the morning, without identifying yourself or knocking on the door, while carrying supplies that were later used to deface his property. "I didn't deface anything. I changed my mind and left. After you noticed the security camera." Susan stood up. "This meeting is out of order. We're here to discuss HOA business, not wild accusations." "Then let's discuss HOA business," Marcus said. "Your attempt to impose fraudulent fines on my client. Your threat to place a lien on his property without following proper procedures. Your selective enforcement of rules. And your coordination with another board member to harass and intimidate him. All of which violates your fiduciary duty as HOA president and potentially constitutes criminal harassment." David Porter, who had been quiet the whole time, spoke up. "Susan, is this true? Did you try to make Ryan let you stay at his house? It was an emergency. My furnace was broken. But you can't force someone to house you. That's crazy." "It's not crazy, it's community support." Margaret Chen shook her head. "Susan, I think you've crossed some lines here. We need to table this discussion about Ryan's supposed violations and talk about your conduct as president." "My conduct? I'm trying to protect this community." "By harassing people," Tom Chen called out from the audience. "By making up violations because someone wouldn't do what you wanted." The meeting devolved into chaos. People were shouting over each other, some defending Susan, most questioning her actions. I sat quietly with Marcus and let it play out. Finally, Marcus stood up and held up his phone. "I have the police report right here documenting the harassment against Mr. Brennan, including video evidence of Patricia Hughes attempting to vandalize his property. I also have documentation of every interaction between Susan Whitmore and my client, including her threats, her false violations, and her attempt to use the HOA as a weapon for personal retaliation." He let that sink in before continuing. "Here's what's going to happen. Mr. Brennan is willing to let this matter drop if the following conditions are met. 1. All fines and violations against him are immediately withdrawn and expunged from HOA records. 2. Susan Whitmore steps down as HOA president effective immediately. 3. The HOA agrees to implement new policies preventing this kind of abuse in the future." "You can't force me to step down," Susan shrieked. "No, but the board can vote to remove you for cause. And if they don't, Mr. Brennan will pursue civil litigation against both you personally and the HOA as an entity. He'll also file formal complaints with the state HOA Oversight Board and pursue criminal harassment charges. Given the documented evidence, he'll win. And the legal fees will bankrupt this HOA and likely force the sale of your personal assets to cover damages." The room went dead silent. David Porter cleared his throat. "I move to remove Susan Whitmore as HOA president for cause, effective immediately." "Second," Margaret Chen said quickly. "This is outrageous," Susan said. "You can't do this to me." "Actually, under the bylaws they can," Marcus said. "Section 21 allows for removal of officers by a 2/3 board vote in cases of misconduct." "All in favor," David said. 3 hands went up. David, Margaret, and Tom Chen, who apparently was actually on the board and I'd never realized it. "Motion passes," David said. "Susan, you're removed as president. Please hand over all HOA documents and access credentials within 48 hours. Susan stood there trembling with rage. Then she grabbed her papers and stormed out of the room. Patricia scurried after her. The meeting continued with David being appointed temporary president and a discussion about reforming HOA procedures to prevent future abuse. I mostly tuned it out, just relieved it was over. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to apologize for believing Susan's narrative or for not speaking up sooner. I accepted their apologies, though part of me wondered why it had taken so long for people to stand up to her obvious bullying. Tom pulled me aside as I was leaving. "Ryan, I'm sorry it got this far. A lot of us knew Susan was out of control, but nobody wanted to deal with the drama of confronting her. I get it, but that's how people like her get away with stuff. Everyone's too afraid to say anything. You're right, we're going to make some changes. Make sure this doesn't happen again." Officer Reeves called me the next day. "We're moving forward with criminal trespassing and attempted vandalism charges against Patricia Hughes. She confessed when we questioned her. Said Susan convinced her that you deserved it for refusing to help during the cold emergency. She's pretty remorseful." "What about Susan? We don't have direct evidence linking her to the vandalism." "Patricia claims Susan didn't explicitly tell her to vandalize your property, just that something needed to be done about you. It's not enough for conspiracy charges." "So Susan gets away with it, criminally, probably. But you could pursue civil charges for harassment and the frivolous HOA fines. And from what I hear, her reputation in your neighborhood is pretty destroyed." Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal. The fines against me were officially withdrawn. Patricia Hughes pleaded guilty to attempted vandalism and got probation plus community service. Susan kept a low profile, though I occasionally saw her leaving her house looking bitter and defeated. The HOA implemented new rules requiring board votes for any fines over $100 and establishing an appeals process for violations. David turned out to be a reasonable president who focused on actual community issues rather than petty power plays. Spring came early that year. By mid-March, temperatures were back in the 50s and people were starting to think about lawn care and gardening instead of frozen pipes and furnace failures. I was working in my garage one Saturday when Marcus stopped by. "Hey Ryan, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "Susan's putting her house on the market. She's moving to Arizona to live with her sister." "Really?" "Yeah. Apparently, things got too uncomfortable for her here. Nobody wants to deal with her anymore, and she's embarrassed about what happened." I felt a small twinge of something that might have been guilt, but mostly was just relief. That's probably for the best. Probably. Anyway, I wanted to thank you for handling that whole situation with class. You could have made it a lot worse for her. I just wanted to stop. I never wanted to ruin her life. I know. But a lot of people would have pushed for more. Criminal charges, massive civil suits, public humiliation. You took the minimum necessary to protect yourself. After Marcus left, I thought about the whole situation. Susan had created a crisis out of her own entitlement and inability to hear the word no. She tried to weaponize the HOA against someone who'd done nothing wrong, and it had backfired spectacularly. I wasn't glad she was leaving, but I wasn't sorry either. Some people needed to face consequences before they'd change their behavior, and some people never changed at all. A month later, I was at the fire station when a new family moved into Susan's old house. The neighborhood Facebook group was full of welcome messages and offers to help them get settled. It felt like the whole community had collectively decided to turn over a new leaf and be the kind of neighborhood that supported each other without demanding compliance or punishing independence. Tom Chen texted me. "New neighbors seem nice. Wife is a teacher, husband works in IT, 2 kids. Already more pleasant than Susan ever was." I smiled and put my phone away. Chief Morrison walked into the common room where several of us were watching television during a slow evening. "Brennan, I got another email about you today," I groaned. "What now?" "Relax, it's a good one." He held up his phone. "It's from your new neighbor, guy named Paul. He wanted to let me know that he heard about how you handled that HOA situation and that he was impressed by your professionalism and restraint. Said the neighborhood is lucky to have you." "That's nice of him." "It is, but it got me thinking. We need a new community liaison for the department. Someone to do outreach, educate people about fire safety, coordinate with local organizations." "You interested?" "Me. You handled a complicated community situation without losing your cool or abusing your position. That's exactly the kind of judgment we need for community relations. Plus, you're good at explaining technical stuff to regular people." "What do you say?" I thought about it. After everything that had happened, the idea of working more closely with the community was both appealing and slightly terrifying. But it also felt right, like maybe something good could come from all that drama with Susan. "Yeah, I'm interested." "Good. We'll talk details later. For now, just know you're getting a small bump in pay and a lot more meetings with civilians. The promotion came through in June." I spent July and August developing fire safety programs for schools and community centers, teaching people about proper use of space heaters, what to do if their furnace failed, and how to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning. At one of my first presentations, a woman raised her hand and asked, "What should we do if our heat goes out during a cold snap?" I smiled. "First, don't panic. Dress in layers, close off rooms you're not using to conserve heat, and use towels or blankets to block drafts. If you have a fireplace, use it safely. If you have space heaters, follow the safety guidelines I just outlined. Call a repair company, and if you can't get service right away, consider staying with family or friends or go to a hotel." "What if hotels are full?" someone else asked. "Then go to a warming center. The city opens several during extreme cold events, and if you're really in danger, call 911. But most importantly, prepare ahead of time. Have your furnace serviced regularly, keep emergency supplies on hand, and have a backup plan before you need it." After the presentation, several people came up to thank me and ask follow-up questions. An elderly man shook my hand and said, "This is good information. I wish everyone would take this stuff seriously instead of expecting other people to solve their problems for them." I thought about Susan and her demands, her inability to prepare or cope with a temporary setback, her immediate impulse to make it someone else's responsibility. "Me too," I said. "Me too." In August, the HOA held a community barbecue. It was the first neighborhood event I'd attended since the whole mess with Susan. I brought beer and helped David with the grilling. Paul, my new neighbor, came over and introduced himself properly. "You're Ryan, right? The guy who handled that crazy HOA lady." "That's me." "Man, I heard stories from like 6 different people. Each version was wilder than the last. What actually happened?" I gave him the quick version while flipping burgers. Paul laughed. "She tried to move in with you. That's insane." "Yeah, it was a weird few weeks." "Well, for what it's worth, this neighborhood seems pretty great now. Everyone's been super welcoming to us. Feels like a real community." "It is. We just had to work through some stuff." As the evening went on, more neighbors stopped by to chat. The Martinez family, whose navy blue door had caused so much drama under Susan's reign, had recently repainted it bright red. Nobody had complained. Patricia Hughes had moved out quietly in July, unable to face people after her vandalism conviction. The neighborhood felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. Tom Chen came over with a beer and clinked it against mine. "To surviving HOA drama." "To surviving," I agreed. "You know, I've been thinking about that whole situation," Tom said. "Susan really thought she was in the right." Like, genuinely believed you were being selfish for not letting her move in. I know. That's what scares me. How convinced she was that being inconvenienced gave her the right to someone else's home. Where does that mindset even come from? I'd thought about that a lot over the past few months. I think some people grow up believing the world should accommodate them, that having a problem means someone else should fix it. And when you combine that with a little bit of power, like being HOA president, it becomes dangerous. Think she learned anything from all this? Probably not. People like Susan usually just decide they're the victim and everyone else is against them. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she's in Arizona working on herself. Tom laughed. Somehow I doubt it. The barbecue went late into the evening. Kids ran around playing while adults talked and laughed. Someone brought out a guitar, and there was terrible but enthusiastic singing. It was the kind of neighborhood gathering that Susan had always tried to organize, but had never quite achieved because her events were more about control than community. I left around 10, walking back to my house under a clear summer sky. The backup furnace unit sat quietly in my backyard, doing nothing in the August heat. It would be months before I needed it again. But I was glad it was there, glad I'd installed it, and glad I'd stood my ground when someone tried to take it from me. Inside, I checked my email and found a message from Marcus. Thought you'd want to know. Susan tried to sue the HOA for wrongful removal. Case was dismissed yesterday. Judge said the board acted within its authority and Susan failed to demonstrate any damages. That should be the end of it. I typed back. Thanks for letting me know. Glad it's finally over. His reply came immediately. These things are never really over, but at least this chapter is closed. He was right. Susan would probably carry her grudges forever, convinced she'd been wronged. Patricia was dealing with the consequences of her choices, and I was moving forward with my life and career. The next morning, Chief Morrison called me into his office. We got some good feedback on your community programs. The mayor's office wants to expand them citywide. You'd be training other firefighters to do similar outreach. That sounds great. It is great. It's also a promotion. Lieutenant Brennan has a nice ring to it, don't you think? I stared at him. Lieutenant, the community liaison position comes with a rank upgrade. Didn't I mention that? No, you definitely didn't, he grinned. Well, surprise. You've earned it, Ryan. The way you handled that HOA situation showed real leadership and judgment. Those are the qualities we need in our officers. I left his office feeling like I was floating. A promotion, expanded responsibilities, and recognition for doing the right thing even when it was difficult. It felt like the universe was validating my choices. That evening, I called my parents in Iowa to tell them about the promotion. My mom answered on the second ring. Ryan, we were just talking about you. How's everything in Springfield? Really good, actually. I got promoted to lieutenant. She squealed and called for my dad to pick up the other phone. They spent 15 minutes congratulating me and asking questions about the new position. I'm so proud of you, my mom said. You've always been someone who stands up for what's right, even when it's hard. Thanks, Mom. How's that neighborhood situation? Last time we talked, you were dealing with that awful woman. It's resolved. She moved away and things are back to normal. Good. Some people just don't understand boundaries. I'm glad you didn't let her push you around. After we hung up, I sat on my back porch and looked out at my yard. The grass needed mowing. The fence needed a fresh coat of stain. Normal homeowner stuff that had nothing to do with HOA drama or power-hungry neighbors. My phone buzzed with a text from Teresa Jenkins, the news reporter who'd called months ago. Heard you got promoted. Congrats. Still interested in telling your HOA story for our segment on HOA Overreach? I typed back. Thanks, but no thanks. The situation is resolved and I'd rather keep it private. Understood. If you change your mind, offer stands. I wouldn't change my mind. Susan's behavior had been outrageous, but turning it into a news story would have just prolonged the drama and potentially hurt property values in the neighborhood. Sometimes the best victory was a quiet one that let everyone move on. September brought cooler temperatures and the first hints of fall. The fire department hosted an open house where I gave demonstrations on fire safety and equipment operation. Dozens of families showed up, including several from my neighborhood. Paul brought his kids, who were fascinated by the fire trucks and all the gear. His wife Karen was nice, not at all like the stereotype her name suggested. "The kids have been talking about this for days," she said. "They think firefighters are superheroes." "We're just people doing a job," I said, "but it's a good job." One of Paul's kids, a boy about 8 years old, tugged on my sleeve. "Is it true you have 2 furnaces at your house?" I laughed. "Where did you hear that?" "Dad said the old neighbor lady got mad because you wouldn't share your backup furnace." "That's sort of true, but it's not really about sharing. Everyone's house belongs to them and nobody can make you let other people use your stuff." The kid nodded seriously. "That makes sense. My sister always wants to use my toys, but they're mine." "Exactly." Paul looked embarrassed. "Sorry, we told them a simplified version of what happened. It's fine. It's actually a good lesson about boundaries and personal property." As the open house wound down, Chief Morrison pulled me aside. "You're good at this, Brennan. Really good. Have you ever thought about teaching at the academy?" "Not really. I like being on active duty." "Something to think about for the future. You've got a gift for explaining things and connecting with people. That's rare." October arrived with beautiful fall colors and temperatures in the 60s. The neighborhood held a Halloween decorating contest that I declined to participate in, having learned my lesson about HOA competitions. But I handed out candy on Halloween night to a steady stream of kids and parents. One group of teenagers came by late in the evening. One of them looked familiar. "Aren't you the firefighter who had that thing with the HOA lady?" one girl asked. "Yeah, that was me. My mom says you're her hero for standing up to her. She said that lady was a nightmare for years." "Well, I'm glad it worked out." After they left, I thought about how stories spread and evolved in communities. I wasn't a hero. I'd just been a guy who refused to be bullied and had the resources to fight back. But if my experience had made it easier for other people to stand up for themselves, that was something positive. November brought the first real cold snap since the previous winter. Temperatures dropped into the 20s overnight, and people rushed to get their furnaces serviced and their homes winterized. I got my primary furnace checked and made sure my backup system was in good working order. Tom came over one evening while I was testing my systems. Getting prepared early this year, after last winter, definitely. Smart. I'm getting our furnace serviced next week, not taking any chances. How's the HOA doing? Good, actually. David's been a solid president, no drama, just normal community stuff. We're getting the roads repaved next spring and upgrading the playground equipment. Sounds reasonable. It is. Turns out an HOA can actually function the way it's supposed to when you don't have someone using it as a personal fiefdom. As Tom left, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. The crisis had been resolved, the bad actors had been removed, and the community had learned valuable lessons about governance and boundaries. December brought snow and holiday decorations. The neighborhood looked festive without being overdone. I put up simple lights and a wreath, enough to participate but nothing elaborate on Christmas Eve. I was working a shift at the station when we got a call about a carbon monoxide incident. A family's furnace had malfunctioned, and they were feeling sick. We arrived within minutes, evacuated the family, and shut down their heating system. They were okay, just shaken. The father thanked me as the paramedics were checking his kids. We wouldn't have known what was happening if we hadn't been to your safety presentation back in July. You talked about the symptoms, and when we started feeling dizzy and nauseous, we knew to get out and call 911. I'm glad you remembered. That's exactly what those presentations are for. You probably saved our lives. Driving back to the station, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was why I'd become a firefighter. Not for recognition or drama, but to help people stay safe. The HOA situation had been a distraction from that mission, but it had also led to opportunities that let me help even more people. Chief Morrison was waiting when we got back. Good work tonight, Brennan. That family would have been in serious trouble if they'd gone to bed without calling. They saved themselves by recognizing the symptoms. Because you taught them. That's the point of the community programs. New Year's Eve arrived with temperatures hovering around 20 degrees. Nothing like the brutal cold from the year before, but cold enough to remind everyone that winter was serious business. I spent the evening at the station, responding to 2 false alarms and 1 small kitchen fire. At midnight, the crew gathered to watch the fireworks over downtown Springfield and toast the new year with sparkling cider. To a boring year, someone said. No drama, no crazy calls, just routine stuff. We all drank to that, knowing it wouldn't happen but hoping anyway. January brought moderate cold and normal winter weather. My backup furnace sat unused, which was fine with me. It was insurance, not something I wanted to need. One morning, I ran into David Porter at the grocery store. He was pushing a cart full of supplies and looked frazzled. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, just busy. Being HOA president is more work than I expected. Susan made it look easy because she was always causing problems instead of actually managing things. David laughed. True, but honestly, it's mostly fine, just a lot of little details. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. Would you be willing to do a fire safety presentation at the next HOA meeting? Nothing fancy, just basic winter safety tips. Sure, I can do that. Great. It'll be at the community center on the 15th, 7 o'clock. The presentation went well. About 30 people showed up, and I spent an hour talking about furnace maintenance, carbon monoxide detectors, space heater safety, and what to do if your heating failed. I didn't mention Susan or the previous year's drama, but everyone was thinking about it. During the Q&A, someone asked, "What if your furnace dies and you can't get it repaired right away?" I went through the same advice I'd given Susan a year ago. Bundle up, use space heaters safely, close off unused rooms, go to a warming center or hotel if needed. Be prepared, have a plan. Don't depend on others to solve your problems. Personal responsibility is key, I said. Your safety is your responsibility first. Help from neighbors and community resources is great, but you can't demand it or expect it. Take care of yourself and help others when you reasonably can. After the meeting, several people thanked me for the information and for handling the Susan situation with dignity. One older woman pulled me aside. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Last year, when all that was happening, I believed Susan's version of events. I thought you were being selfish. But after she got removed and the truth came out, I realized I'd been fooled. I'm sorry I didn't speak up for you." "It's okay. Susan was convincing. She was, but that's no excuse. I should have asked questions instead of just going along with the mob. I won't make that mistake again." Walking home that night, I felt like the whole experience had come full circle. A year ago, I'd been exhausted and frustrated, dealing with someone who couldn't accept reasonable boundaries. Now, I was using that experience to help others, teaching them about safety and preparedness and personal responsibility. Susan was somewhere in Arizona, probably still convinced she'd been wronged. Patricia was somewhere dealing with the consequences of her choices. And I was here, living my life, doing my job, and being part of a community that had learned and grown from a difficult situation. My backup furnace hummed quietly in the background, doing its job when needed and sitting idle when it wasn't, just like it was supposed to. Just like I'd always intended, the neighborhood had moved on. The HOA was functioning properly, and I had a career I loved, a community I was proud to serve, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd stood up for what was right even when it was difficult. That was enough. That was more than enough. As winter gave way to spring and life continued its normal rhythms, I sometimes thought about that morning when Susan had knocked on my door demanding access to my backup furnace. It had seemed like such a bizarre request at the time, and it still did in retrospect. But it had also been a catalyst for positive change, forcing the neighborhood to confront problems that had been festering under Susan's leadership. The new family in Susan's old house had integrated seamlessly into the community. The HOA was focused on actual community needs rather than personal vendettas. And I had a job I loved with new responsibilities that let me make a real difference. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living well, standing your ground, and refusing to let unreasonable people dictate your choices. Susan had tried to use the HOA as a weapon, and it had backfired completely. Not because I'd fought back aggressively, but because I'd simply refused to comply with unreasonable demands and let the system work as it was supposed to. The backup furnace that had caused so much drama was just a heating system, but it had also become a symbol of something larger. Personal responsibility, reasonable boundaries, the difference between helping your neighbors and being exploited by them, the importance of standing up to bullies even when they have official titles. I was glad I'd installed it, glad I'd stood my ground, and glad that the whole mess had ultimately made both me and my community stronger.